All right, I want to start this sermon off with an exercise. We have been in the book of Luke for a very long time now. We've made it all the way to chapter 14. Our sermon series theme has been apprenticing to Jesus. And I want to see if we are getting a sense now of what it means to apprentice to Jesus. Now, obviously, we're all different. We look different, we act different, we connect with Jesus in different ways. But what are some of the common denominators? How would you define or describe an apprentice of Jesus? Now we'll see how good my spelling is on the fly. Servant, okay. A student, all right. And a student of whom or what? Or just a student? Student of Jesus, perfect. I love that. Yeah, we'll add that learner word. Looking to the master. All right. How else can we describe an apprentice of Jesus? Humble? We'll add that.
And bold.
Humble and bold. All right, we'll do that. I love that. Compassionate, perfect. Kind-hearted, yeah. All right, now we are starting to describe a certain kind of fruit. So we could go all 9, or what might we say?
Loving.
Katie wants all 9. Right on. All right, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to encapsulate these as growing in the fruit of the Spirit. All right. What else we got? Forgiving. Oh, yeah. That's a good one. It's both in the Lord's Prayer and also Matthew 18. It comes up quite a bit. What else would define? Sorry? Generous. All right. All right, well, underline. Discerning, okay. Oh, repentant, yes. Grateful, all right. Hospitable, yeah. Faithful, all right. Obedience, yes. I'm going to put that one in a full all caps because that is actually how Larry Osborne, that would be the word, the simplest way he would describe a apprentice of Jesus as one who's growing in obedience to Jesus. So he kind of puts that as all of these all in one. But where else? What else we got? Yep, we got that student. You guys can't see because I didn't double space this. I should have been writing bigger. Curious? Yeah, we can do that. And then I got one on the other side. Yeah, yes, worship, yes. Apprentices of Jesus worship. That is a perfect verb. I'll go worshiper. Worshiping in spirit and truth. We've used kind of a phrase. It's got 3 components to it. We've talked about how apprentices of Jesus do 3 things. Do you remember what those 3 things are? Yeah, abide is definitely encapsulated in that. So they abide with Jesus. Perfect. But it's not the phrase that we've been using.
They are like Jesus, be like Jesus.
Yeah, be with Jesus, become like Jesus, do what Jesus did. Be with. Become like. Do what he did. Anything else? Anything else that kind of comes to your mind? This is actually good. This is a very cool crowdsourced list. I love it. Anything else come to your mind? Yes. Yeah, they pray. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Let us say they step into spiritual practices. That way we can, again, encapsulate a whole bunch. Seekers, yes. Yeah, we got generous. You there. Yes. Sorry? Oh, yeah, there's they sacrificial. That here. Yeah, we've done a very good job, actually. I think we'll, the only thing I might add is, especially after Caleb kind of let us know or reminded us that this whole journey has to be Spirit-empowered, and so that they live Spirit-empowered. Seek that filling of the Spirit. Then in line with that, I will say that they exercise spiritual gifts. It's part of doing what Jesus did, but sometimes when you sort of space it out, it just helps us remind us the importance. I think that's a pretty good list, yeah? Yeah? All right, I will move this off to the side in such a way that it hopefully doesn't get in the way. And I can type out a better one at some point so that you guys can see it all. Yeah, that's a pretty good list, though. Like I think that we've done a very good job of encapsulating a lot of different elements. And so we've been trying to figure out, we've been sort of stepping into this series, looking at this whole idea of what apprentices of Jesus do, what apprenticing to Jesus is all about. I, like you, have been kind of wrestling with some of these ideas, and I think the only other thing that is assumed in this that I've sort of tried to put into a statement is that an apprentice of Jesus is someone who's accepted his invitation to follow. It's not an automatic thing. You need to choose and step into that. And then they spend time with Jesus, become like Jesus, and are learning to do the things of Jesus as they grow in obedience to the commands and purposes of Jesus, dependent on the power of the Holy Spirit. So I think the definition that I've been working on is definitely in line with what you guys said. So we did a very good job there. So thank you. Thank you for stepping into that with me. It's good to think about that every now and again. Today, as we open Luke 14, 25 to 35, as we move into the next section of the book of Luke, Jesus is going to speak to what it means to be his apprentice. That's part of the reason why we did this exercise, is Jesus is going to talk now about what it means to be an apprentice. And he's going to share a difficult teaching about the cost of apprenticing to him. He's going to hit us with a bit of a heavy moment, and then he's going to use 3 examples to show the importance of counting that cost. And what I love about this teaching is that while it shows us the seriousness of following Jesus, while there is a weightiness to their conversation, it also encourages and honors people who want to research, who want to investigate, who want to consider what following Jesus entails. Jesus doesn't want people to make a snap decision for him and then give up when things get difficult. He wants people to count the cost and then step out in faith, fully embracing the journey and fully embracing him no matter what life throws their way. He wants people who will be all in for him. As I was saying that, I was reminded that on my shelf I have a Denver Broncos hat because there was a moment in time where I thought, you know what, I am going to follow the NFL and I'm going to cheer for the Denver Broncos. That lasted basically, I think, one season, and then when Peyton Manning left, it was like, I don't know if I'm actually a Denver Broncos fan anymore, especially not as they go through this time of darkness. I feel like I may have stepped into it and then stepped out of it. I am not an all-in Denver Broncos fan. And so Jesus is asking us to count the cost before we buy the hat, before we put on the t-shirt. He is asking us to consider, are we ready to go all in for Jesus? So let me read Luke 14, 25 to 35. Let's hear what Jesus has to say about apprenticing to him. In Luke 14, we read these words. A large crowd was following Jesus. He turned around and said to them, if you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. Your father and mother, your wife and children, your brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. But don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and then everyone would laugh at you. They would say, that's the person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it. Or what king would go to war against another king without first sitting down with his counselors to discuss whether his army of 10,000 could defeat the 20,000 soldiers marching against him? And if he can't, he'll send a delegation to discuss terms of peace while the enemy is still far away. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. Salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? Flavorless salt is good neither for the soil nor the manure pile. It is thrown away. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. Let's step back for a moment. This is a heavy teaching. Let's just step back. Now remember, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He knows what awaits him there, and he has tried to help his first apprentices understand. That word that the New Living Translation is translating as disciple, it's the Greek word mathetes. It can also mean learner. And it's describing a particular education style that is somewhat more like our word apprentices, which is why we keep defaulting to that apprenticeship language. Ever since we started switching to that language of an apprentice of Jesus, it's really helped me recognize those own apprenticeship moments in my life when I was a pastoral intern or when I was a general machinist apprentice. I can see how it isn't just a job. It's an invitation to vocation. It's an invitation to follow somebody. And so we're using this language of apprenticeship because it really does translate this Greek word disciple or mathetes well. And so Jesus is speaking, he's teaching about apprentices. His first apprentices, who we call the apostles, he's tried to help them understand what is going to await him. In fact, in Luke 9, as he set his face towards Jerusalem, he there said to that small group of apprentices that to follow him, they must be willing to give up their own way and take up their cross daily. And it's clear in that context that the apprentices really didn't understand what Jesus was saying. And now Jesus is saying a similar thing about taking up a cross, and this seems to be the first time Jesus uses this language with a larger crowd. Now, in between Luke 14:24 and Luke 14:25, Jesus has left the Sabbath dinner party. He is back on the road to Jerusalem, and he is accompanied by a large crowd. They are all traveling in the same direction towards Jerusalem. But though they are all following Jesus, because he's in the lead in this caravan, they are not all apprentices of Jesus. Jesus was going up to Jerusalem for the Passover celebration, and all of the Israelite community who were able would be making this same journey. And so on all of the major roads to Jerusalem, there would be these bands of travelers heading up to celebrate. And Jesus is in one of these bands. There is a large crowd following him as he makes his way to Jerusalem. And I have no doubt that this crowd surrounding Jesus were excited to be with him. I mean, every so often you wind up in a crowd and you're like, hey, I'm in the crowd with so-and-so. I'm in the crowd with someone very, very exciting to be with. And so it's exciting to be in that moment. And Jesus is leading this group. The crowd is excited to be following him. And I would even bet that in this crowd, there would be some that were investigating Jesus. They were trying to understand who he might be. His reputation had spread over the region, and many were trying to get a sense of his life and his message. What is this Jesus guy really about? And so here's a crowd. They are following Jesus to Jerusalem. They're all traveling to Passover. And Jesus turns to them and says, hey, if you guys want to be my apprentice, if you want to be my disciple, if you truly want to follow me, then you must. And the New Living Translation adds, by comparison, you must hate everything else, father, mother, wife, children, brother, sister, your very life. Otherwise, you cannot become an apprentice to Jesus. Then Jesus says that the way of Jesus, the path of apprenticeship, is to take up your cross daily and follow. Wow. Can you imagine? I mean, sorry, Brendan. Sorry, Katie. Sorry, Jen. To follow Jesus, I need to hate you. Sorry, Mom. Sorry, Dad, when you're watching online later. Sorry, Nolan, Joel, Jessica, my siblings. I need to hate you. Sorry, self. Nathan, I need to hate you in order to follow this Jesus. That is a hard word. Can we just accept that is difficult? And so let's try to understand what Jesus is saying. I like the way the New Living Translation adds that phrase, by comparison. That phrase isn't in the original. For those of you that were English majors, you will know that a metaphor makes a direct comparison. Nathan is a tree standing firm on stage, right? Whereas a simile is Nathan is like a tree standing firm on the stage. Metaphors are often stronger, but I'm not actually a tree, just so that you know. Right? The metaphor makes a comparison by hyperbole, and by saying that I am, it's trying to be illustrative. I think in the same way that Jesus is using strong hyperbolic language to underscore his main point, and I think the main point is this: Jesus' apprentices need to be all in for him. They need to commit first to him so that every other relationship pales in comparison or is empowered by that first relationship. And this is really important because Jesus is not asking us to detest. That's another word for hate. Hate could also be translated as detest or love less. Jesus isn't asking us to detest our spouses, our kids, or our parents, or our siblings. But he is asking us to be so devoted in love to him and his ways that we put him first. Jesus is asking us to love God to such a degree that our love for our spouses and kids and parents and siblings is actually empowered by that love. And here is why I think that Jesus' words are about that comparison. Here's why I think Jesus is using strong and hyperbolic language to talk about our need to put him first and be all in for him. You see, Jesus was raised in the Old Testament. He would have memorized large chunks of it. As a teacher of the law, he would have had incredible amounts up in his brain. But more than that, one of the most significant passages in the Old Testament for the Israelite people that everyone would have memorized at some point in their life is Deuteronomy 6:5, what we call the greatest commandment. And I want to read verses 4-6 as I share it with you. These verses are called the Shema. And this became a daily Israelite prayer. Waking and going to bed, all faithful Israelites would pray these verses, just as a reminder of who God is and their call to worship him. And so Deuteronomy 6:4-6 says, "Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to all these commands that I'm giving you today." Friends, what do these verses say? Love God with everything, right? Heart, soul, strength, and commit yourselves wholeheartedly to him and his commands. Really, this is saying love God as first in your life. Now, in Deuteronomy, as God called the Israelite people into relationship with him, he laid out a path for them, a path of discipleship called the law. And he asked them to follow it with their whole selves. And then at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, after laying out this path of discipleship, Moses called the Israelite people to count the cost, to choose between following God and following the ways of the world and the nations around them. They had to choose which path they would follow. In Deuteronomy, it's called the path of obedience or the path of disobedience. And the story of the people of Israel is while they had seasons of obedience, they were often led astray to follow the things of the world. They often failed to love God with heart, soul, and strength. They tried godly rules to help, but those rules could not bring transformation to the heart. They tried godly leaders, but those leaders were also sinful and were led astray by their passions and desires. And so the Old Testament prophets, Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Joel, they looked forward to a day when God would make a new covenant, a new path of apprenticeship. When God would not only call his people back into spiritual relationship with him and forgive their sin, but he would also bring new transformation. He would give them a soft spiritual heart which could respond to God's commands, a renewed spirit that could reconnect them with God, and new power through the infilling of the Holy Spirit. At this point, as Jesus walks along this road, the crowd is looking for that renewed covenant. They're looking for that new covenant. And Jesus is the key to that new path of apprenticeship. Through his death, resurrection, ascension, and the sending of the Spirit, a new way is opened so that we can love God with heart, soul, and strength. As we place our faith and trust in him, as we start the apprenticeship journey, he does the work inside us that we cannot do. He renews our heart. He renews our soul. He renews our mind. He renews our strength. He gives us new capacity to choose him and to follow wholeheartedly. We still fail and mess up, but because of what he has done, there is forgiveness and grace, and even in our failures, we can fail forward, pressing on towards that goal of spending time with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and doing the things that Jesus did. And so I think what is happening as Jesus turns to this crowd and shares this shocking statement, I think he is telling us, I think this is hyperbole. I don't think he's actually telling us that we need to hate those closest to us. But I think what's happening in this dramatic statement is that Jesus is reframing the invitation of Deuteronomy 6:5 around himself. And he's calling us to love him with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. But Jesus is also preparing us for the fact that when we choose him, it might put us into conflict with those closest to us. We don't have to hate those who may betray us when we choose Jesus, but he is letting those followers know that by choosing him, by putting him first, by loving him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, it may bring us into conflict with those closest to us. In many parts of the world, to choose the Jesus way might cause your family to want to kill you. That is a reality that Christians in other parts of the world have to deal with. To say yes to Jesus means your uncle, your brother, your father, someone is going to try to kill you. In other parts of the world, the day you are baptized into the name of Jesus is the day your family disowns you and cuts you off. You are no longer connected to your ancestors, and you're no longer connected to your heritage. If you choose to go through the waters of baptism, boom, your family says, we don't know you anymore. You're not one of us. And that is why baptism in some parts of the world is an incredibly hard choice. Because to say yes to Jesus is to say no to your family, lineage, and heritage in some parts of the world. And so Jesus isn't counseling us to hate your family. But in some situations, to say yes to Jesus, there is a breaking. There is a separation. There is a putting Jesus first that comes with a significant personal cost. And this cost is not just a one-time cost. Because Jesus then says his apprentices are to take up their crosses and follow him. Now, at this point in the Jesus story, I don't think anyone, not the crowd, not the disciples, I don't think anyone would have understood what Jesus was saying. I don't think this was common language. After all, the cross was seen as a brutal element of torture, symbolizing Roman imperial power. The cross was seen as suffering, but who would want to suffer that fate? I had one lady sort of use a different translation. She said something to the effect of, take up your death stick and follow me. Because that's what it was. I mean, a cross was a death stick. It was an instrument of your execution. Who wants to carry that every day? And so I don't know if they would have understood, but remember, at this point, the crowd is on their way to Jerusalem. They are going, as they did every year, to celebrate the Passover. And they're celebrating the events from the book of Exodus. They're celebrating that something God had done 1,500 years earlier to bring rescue and redemption. And they are coming to sacrifice lambs. Lambs must die that they can step into the moment of remembering their freedom. And they have no idea that God is about to do an even greater rescue. They have no idea that he is about to open a new door, that he's about to bring a new freedom. And here, Jesus says that just as the Israelite community needed to follow the path laid out in the Passover, making bread without yeast, eating in haste, sacrificing the Passover lamb, and painting that blood on the doorways and the lintels of the house, Jesus is telling the people that now God is about to make a new path, a new plan of rescue, and to place faith and trust in Jesus, to follow in the footsteps of our crucified and resurrected Messiah. Jesus here is inviting people to trust him and to demonstrate that trust by following him even when the path is difficult. So it's a hard word. But then Jesus used 3 images to help us understand what it means to count the cost of apprenticing to him. He invites us to apprentice to him. He recognized that we can't follow wholeheartedly without first doing our due diligence. And so he gives us some images to try to help us understand what it costs, how to calculate the cost. And the first image he uses is that of a builder. Now, we have lots of people here in the church that have built things. They've renovated rooms, they've built houses, and we all know that to build successfully, you need a plan. You need a budget. You need to ensure that you have the adequate resources to complete the project. Did you know that one of the requirements for the Enabling Accessibility Grant that we received for the lifts, one of the longest conversation I had with the granting agency was they wanted to ensure that we had a contingency, that we had the capacity over and beyond the money they were going to give us. They wanted to make sure the project could get done. Honestly, by the time they'd accepted our project, the conversation to get the check cut took like 2 minutes. The conversation for them to assure that we would actually be able to finish the project almost a year before they said yes to us, that conversation took 45 minutes. Given the money? No. But can you actually finish the project? Will you be able to do the work? And before we accepted, we needed to be able to make sure that we could finish the work. And so Bruce and Wendy, they spent a week ensuring, would we be able to do this project? They did the due diligence for us, and they drove all over Edmonton. They contacted a number of different people. They made sure that if we said yes, that we would have the ability to finish the job. This is the exact same imagery that Jesus is doing. He's using. He's saying, here's what it looks like to follow. We need to love him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. We need to commit to him. We need to take up our cross daily. He is going to, through his death and resurrection, bring in that new covenant whereby his Spirit is going to enable us to do this. This isn't a work harder, try better. This isn't that kind of message, but there is a cost. And he invites us to say, hey, are we willing and able to pay that cost? And again, salvation is free. What Jesus has done for us is a free gift, but are we willing to accept that free gift and all that it entails, namely putting himself first over ourselves? As I was thinking about this part, I realized that the biggest cost is really whether I am willing to give up my selfishness and my pursuit of what Nathan wants in order to follow the one who paid his all to rescue me. I am the actual biggest obstacle. I am the one as I count the cost, I'm the one that I'm really counting to say, Nathan, are you willing to put Jesus first? Are you willing to follow him? So the invitation here to follow Jesus means that we take stock. We take the time to consider what it means to follow him, just like building a budget, just like making a blueprint. We examine ourselves and say, hey, am I willing to put myself second so that I can put him first? Now, the second image that Jesus uses is that of the king who has heard that an enemy army is on the way. Jesus says that this king a good king would look at his own troops and he would count the cost of war. Is he able to stop this enemy through war, or should he send a delegation and make peace while this enemy is still a long ways off? And here Jesus says that the prudent king would make peace even if it cost him greatly. Now, one commentary I read took both of the parables, the parable of the builder and the parable of the king. And this commentator thought that they were actually asking the same question from two different perspectives. The first story was asking the question, can I afford to follow Jesus? And the second story was asking the question, can I afford not to follow Jesus? Now, I don't know if that was the original intent, but I do know that these two stories invite us to look honestly at ourselves, to recognize that, like any choice, to say yes to Jesus is to say no to other things. The original sin in the garden, when Adam and Eve took from the tree they were not supposed to, that was a choice. In saying yes to their own pursuit of good and evil, to say yes to the fruit was saying no to God's leadership and rule. And in rejecting God, that relationship was broken. And now, as Jesus comes to redeem and restore the Father's original shalom through his death and resurrection, he is inviting us to say yes to him, to return to him. But that is also, that choice to say yes to Jesus means saying no to other things. Means saying no to self, no to that original choice in the garden of choosing my own way. And part of what it means to count the cost is to say, do I want to stay on my own path? Do I want to stay stuck in my sin and shame? Is my way working? And what happens if I choose the Jesus way? Jesus invites us to count the cost. Can I afford to follow Jesus? Can I afford not to follow Jesus? Now, the third illustration that Jesus uses is from the culinary world. In ancient times, salt was a pretty big deal. Roman soldiers actually received part of their payment, their salary, in salarium, salt. Salarium, salary, it means salt money. It basically was one of the ways that they got paid. So any of you salaried employees, that word is tied into the Roman word for salt, because salt was that big of a deal, that every Roman soldier got a salarium, a salary in salt for their participation in the army. Salt was used to flavor food. It was used to preserve food. But the thing is, not all salt was created equal. Some salt actually had very little sodium chloride or table salt in it. Instead, it had other minerals, and so it was possible in a humid environment where improperly stored salt, if it was not stored properly, it was possible for the saltiness or the sodium chloride to leach out, leaving a pile of other minerals, which no longer had the flavor or the preservation properties. It may have had lots of other cool crystals, but without the sodium chloride, it's not tasting good and it's not preserving things. It no longer had flavor or preservation properties. And so what do you do with that? What do you do with a pile of weird crystals? You really don't want to put a bunch of them in your manure, in your compost pile, because you don't know what these crystals are. You don't know what what the chemicals are. You can't really do anything with it. It's useless. And so in this final picture, Jesus circles back to his big idea that the apprentices need to be fully devoted. They need to be salty. They can't be salt in name only. They can't be followers in name only. They have to be all in for Jesus, because to be salt in name but not in flavor or preservation quality is kind of worthless. Followers of Jesus have to be all in for Jesus. And then the final phrase that Jesus says is, anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. And this is a common phrase in the teachings of Jesus. It's a phrase he uses especially when he has given a hard teaching or he has spoken in stories or parables. And so the invitation is not to rush past. The invitation is not to brush it off, but it's to slow down and to take time to consider, to hear, to wrestle, to seek God for understanding. And so as I was trying to figure out how do we close such a difficult message, how do we close a time of hearing Jesus say that to follow him we must hate everybody and take up our cross and follow him, how do we close? I realized that what we really need is we just need some space to slow down, to breathe, to reflect, to consider what Jesus might be saying to each one of us. After all, to follow him means to accept his invitation to follow. As we say yes to Jesus, we spend time with him, we become like him, we do what he did. As we grow in obedience to the commands and purposes of Jesus, dependent on the power of the Holy Spirit. And so I want to invite you just to consider your own journey of following Jesus. I want to invite you to consider where you're at. You may be in the counting the cost phase. You may be someone who's saying, hey, I'm hearing about the apprenticing. I'm opening my mind. I'm opening my heart, but I'm still kind of putting those budget things in the spreadsheet. And the exciting thing about this passage is you are welcome to do that. That's a great place to be. You are invited to count the cost, and Jesus is giving you permission to kind of sit on the fence and kick tires a little bit. I love to kick tires on things. I love to spend time investigating and research. I bought this watch for less than $40. I took 3 months to figure it out, okay? I am a guy who takes a long time to make decisions. I spend a lot of time kicking tires. And so the invitation of this passage is to take that time to kick those tires. But the invitation is also to be all in for Jesus, to be a person who says, okay, when I have said yes, Jesus, what does it look like? What does it mean for me to love you with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength? What does it mean for me to take up my cross daily and step into service and student and humility and boldness and compassion and kind-heartedness and lovingness and seeking after the things of God? What does it mean to be forgiving and generous and sacrificial and discerning and repentant and grateful and hospitable and obedient and curious, to be a worshiper, to be one who abides, who is with Jesus, who becomes like Jesus, who does what he did, who prays, who steps into spiritual practices, who seeks the filling of the Spirit and exercises spiritual gifts in community? Probably should add community to that list now that we're at this stage. So let me pray, and then let's just listen to what Jesus might be saying to us in these moments. Jesus, I thank you for hard teachings. I thank you for difficult conversations, because in those moments of difficulty, you help us to expose where things are really at. And Jesus, right now, you know our hearts. You know where we're at in our journey with you. You know those things that are holding us back. You know those concerns that we have, and you are so gracious. Your hand is extended to each one. And so I pray in these moments as we just quiet our hearts, as we take those deep breaths, as we consider again what you might be saying to us. Jesus, we invite you to speak. Jesus, would you continue to lead us? Would you continue to call us? We thank you again for your incredible gifts of salvation. We thank you that you have done the heavy lifting. Through your death and your resurrection and your ascension, through the sending of the Spirit, you have opened this new and living way so that we can boldly enter your throne room. Jesus, I thank you that we can take up our cross because you have already gone to the cross. You have already died the death that we deserve. You have already paid the price that we could never pay. I thank you that you seal us with your Spirit, and by your Spirit, you have called us into fellowship, into friendship with you. So Jesus, continue to speak to us, continue to lead us, continue to guide us, and help us to stand on you as our cornerstone. We pray these things in Jesus' name.